My name is Arthur Bennett, and I am 72 years old. I've spent nearly my whole life in a quiet town called Willow Bend, Washington, the kind of place where the seasons announce themselves not through calendars but through smells. Cedar in the spring, river mist in the mornings, smoke curling from chimneys when autumn begins to cool the bones. The air carries memory here. Even silence feels like it has weight. When I wake, the first sound I hear is the faint whistle of the freight train crossing the bridge 2 miles east. It's always come at the same time, 6:15 a.m., as if the engineer and I are the last 2 men keeping time in this town. I used to open my eyes and listen to it with my wife beside me. Now, for 4 winters, I've opened them to her photograph on the nightstand, smiling the way she used to when I forgot to dust the mantel. I once ran a small woodworking shop downtown, Bennett's Craft and Joinery, painted in flaking green letters across the window. That shop used to hum with the scent of sawdust and pine resin. There was always a soft rhythm, the spin of a lathe, the low murmur of the radio, the scrape of a plane across oak. But my hands, once sure and steady, now tremble at times. These days I only carve when the mood calls, not for clients, but for the silence that comes with it. Since my wife passed, the shop feels too large and the nights too long. Her photograph rests on the kitchen shelf, beside the chipped mug she used every morning. A blue one with a faded rim, just big enough for her hands. Each morning, I make coffee, sit by the window, and speak to her silently as the first light crawls across the floorboards. Sometimes I imagine she still listens, still hums softly while I talk about nothing at all. My son, Julian, is the steady point in my life, or at least he used to be. He lives in Spokane with his wife, Marissa, visiting when his schedule allows. He's 42 now, confident, composed, always wearing those pressed shirts that seem allergic to wrinkles. He stands straight, speaks carefully, and smiles just enough to keep people comfortable. Beside him, I often feel like an old stump next to polished stone. I think back often to when he was a boy, the way his small hands once gripped a piece of sandpaper, the dust clinging to his freckles as we built our first bench together. He was patient and curious, asking about every nail and joint. I thought that patience meant he'd grow into a gentle man. I used to believe good craftsmanship made good character. But time has a way of sanding down certainties. One Sunday afternoon they came by. The air smelled of rain and lilacs, a cool front rolling down from the hills. Marissa held her tablet close to her chest like a shield, smiling with that polished ease of someone used to convincing others. Julian sat across from me, tapping his mug as if testing its strength. They said they wanted to help me modernize. Marissa spoke first, all warmth and lightness. "Arthur, you shouldn't have to worry about bills or online accounts. We can make it easier," she said, tapping her screen. Julian added softly, "It would be safer if we managed your pension and savings. Everything in one place." His tone was gentle, measured, the kind a doctor uses before naming a disease. I nodded, unsure. Their words flowed like water, calm and well-rehearsed. Marissa explained how she could link my accounts, automate payments, simplify everything. I smiled and thanked them. When they left, I stood by the doorway, watching the taillights fade between the dripping trees. The house felt smaller somehow, as though their words had settled into the walls, taking up space that used to belong to my peace. A week later, Julian called. His voice was light, practiced. He asked if I'd received the new debit card. "It's simpler this way, Dad," he said. "One account, one set of hands." I laughed, said I trusted him, and I meant it or wanted to. But after I hung up, a strange quiet lingered. His voice had been too formal, like he was reading from a script. For the next few days, I buried myself in work. Sanding chairs, oiling tools, fixing squeaky hinges. I tried to drown my doubt in the scent of varnish. But even the cedar, that smell that once felt like home, started to remind me of time slipping away, of things I couldn't repair with my hands. Then one Tuesday morning, around 9:05 a.m., I realized my checkbook was gone. I searched everywhere, drawers, counters, even the refrigerator, because grief and confusion make fools of us all. Finally, I found it tucked among Marissa's printed papers. Inside was a folded sheet with my signature faintly traced, as though copied by a careful hand. My stomach turned. I told myself it must be a mix-up. I even laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that doesn't sound human, just hollow. That Friday they visited again. Marissa brought her tablet, showing charts and graphs in bright colors. Julian explained how the accounts were now streamlined, easier to track. I nodded and smiled, but in the reflection of the cabinet glass, I saw a man pretending calm. That night, I sat on the porch beneath a clouded moon, trying to believe that trust was still a virtue, that this was what a good father did. But the thought wouldn't leave. Each night it grew heavier until sleep became something distant, something I had to earn. I started waking before dawn, pacing the floorboards, touching every piece of furniture as though grounding myself in what remained. Then one morning, around 6:40 a.m., I stood in the living room surrounded by everything my wife had once touched. The couch where she napped, the lamp from Spokane, the table where Julian had done his schoolwork. Those were the things Julian and Marissa always admired most when they visited, commenting on how quaint or vintage everything looked. That's when I decided to test them. I called a local secondhand shop and asked them to clear nearly everything out. When the truck pulled away, the house echoed, bare walls, hollow steps. I kept only one wooden chair and the shelf with my wife's photograph. For the first time in years, I could hear the entire house breathe. When they came that Saturday, Marissa froze at the doorway. "What happened to the furniture?" she asked. "I sold it," I said. Her expression flickered, surprise, then judgment. "It looks poor now," she murmured. Julian frowned. "Dad, you should have told us. We could have handled it." "Why does it matter?" I asked. "It just makes us uncomfortable," he said. That word, uncomfortable, hung in the air like smoke. Not worried, not sad, just uncomfortable. They left soon after, leaving the air heavy with something final. The next morning, under a gray sky, I drove into town. The roads were slick with rain, and the trees bowed gently in the wind. At the bank, I asked the teller, a young woman named Evelyn, for 8 months of statements. She smiled politely, typing on her keyboard, then asked if I wanted all accounts or just the main one. "All," I said. Outside, I sat on a bench beneath the awning, the papers trembling in my hands. Each page was a small betrayal, withdrawals I hadn't made, bills sent to an address in Spokane, transactions that didn't belong to me. My name, Julian's key. The numbers blurred, then settled into meaning. I folded the papers neatly and slipped them into my jacket. People walked past me, laughing, carrying groceries. To them, I was just an old man resting. No one could tell betrayal can sound this quiet. At home, I sat in my truck for a long time, listening to the rain tap the roof. My thoughts wandered to Julian as a boy, sawdust in his hair, pride shining in his eyes when he built his first stool. I had taught him to measure twice, cut once, but maybe I never taught him what couldn't be measured: honesty. Inside, I sat in the lone chair, the clock ticking softly. Love without truth, I realized, becomes fragile, a structure that looks solid until you touch it. That was the moment I decided to see things clearly. The next morning, I drove to Anderson and Company, a law office near the old post building. The place smelled of paper, ink, and lemon polish. Mr. Anderson, a kind-eyed man with silver hair and rolled sleeves, listened quietly as I told him everything. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he said, "Arthur, that's fraud. Protecting yourself isn't betrayal." His words felt like a lungful of air after being held underwater. He gave me steps. Close every account, change passwords, gather proof, open a new account in my name only. It sounded like rebuilding a house after a fire. Slow, but possible. Over the next few days, I followed every instruction. At the bank, the clerk asked, "Would you like your son added as a cosigner?" "No," I said. "Just me this time." She nodded gently. When I stepped outside, sunlight broke through the clouds, hitting the hood of my truck. A small, private victory. Back home, I cleared my wife's old sewing desk and laid out everything I'd gathered: bank statements, receipts, letters. I labeled each folder carefully. Fraud, bills, transfers, proof. Each label felt like a beam holding up a new structure inside me. That evening, I walked across the street to my neighbor, Mrs. Clara Morton's house. She's lived there 35 years, always tending to her roses, always ready with a pie cooling on the windowsill. Her porch smelled like apples and cinnamon. I told her everything, from the missing checkbook to the lawyer's words. She listened quietly, hands folded in her lap. When I finished, she said softly, "Sometimes love needs boundaries to remain love." Before I left, she promised to be my witness if ever I needed one. That night, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter. I recorded every date, every transaction, then wrote a note to Julian. "I still love you, but love cannot erase what's been done." I sealed it, labeled the envelope if anything happens, and placed it in the top drawer. It was 11:20 p.m. when I turned off the lamp. The chair across from me sat empty, but the emptiness no longer frightened me. For the first time in months, I felt balanced, not peaceful but steady. A few days later, Thursday afternoon, they came again. The same gray sedan, the same gravel crunch. I watched from the window, then opened the door, standing firm in the threshold. I didn't invite them in. Julian's voice was sharp, his face pale. "You're ruining my life," he said. "You've gone too far."
"I'm protecting Mina," he answered.
He shook his head. "You think I wanted your money? You never understood me. You cared more about that shop than about your own son." His words struck hard, not because they were cruel, but because they were true in a way. I had spent years in that shop, sanding away grief, maybe neglecting what needed tending most. But pain, I told him, doesn't excuse harm. Marissa stepped forward, her voice trembling. "We only wanted to help, Arthur." "No," I said gently. "You wanted control. That's different." She looked at Julian, eyes wide, unsure. I told them I had the documents. The truth landed visibly on Julian. His shoulders sagged, his jaw clenched. "You're choosing money over family," he whispered. "No," I said. "I'm choosing dignity." They left quietly. Their footsteps on the gravel sounded like the last nails driven into a finished coffin. Days passed in silence. Then, a letter came from Mr. Anderson. The case was settled privately. Julian would repay the funds within 9 months under supervision. No criminal record if he kept his word. I read it twice. Justice had come, but victory felt hollow, like an echo without its voice. That evening, I sat on the porch as the sun sank behind the cedar trees. The air smelled of wood smoke and river wind. The light turned gold across the railing I'd built years ago, my last true handiwork. I thought of Julian and hoped he'd one day understand that the line I drew was not punishment, but mercy. Love without boundaries can't keep anyone safe. As twilight deepened, I looked at my wife's photo beside me and whispered, "It's all right now. He'll have to find his own way." The first star appeared above the hills, faint but steady. I leaned back, let the stillness settle around me. Love can heal, but only when it's honest. Forgiveness can stand beside justice. And dignity, it doesn't shout. It settles quietly, like wood in an old house finding its place again. That's the last thing I built, plank by plank, in the fading light of Willow Bend. You just heard a story of betrayal, survival, and quiet revenge. If it left you thinking, hit like, share it forward, and subscribe for more true emotional stories that'll stay with you long after they end. Every click helps another story find its voice.